Snow was still falling the morning Riven Ashkarn signed his wife away. It drifted grey and silent over the fortress of Haimeir, over orchards that had not fruited in 2 winters, over the thinned and starving packs huddled in the valley below. The grey wane had come to Caldray 2 winters before. A wasting sickness. It greyed the game, hollowed the herds, and left even strong wolves too weak to run down a rabbit. Half the kingdom had buried its pups that winter. The other half had buried its pride. And into that ruin had ridden the envoys of Morvan, the great pack of the eastern mountains, fat, unbroken, untouched by the sickness, offering the one thing Caldray could no longer win for itself: peace, grain, survival, for a price. Riven stood at the long black table in the treaty hall and did not feel like a king. He felt like a man watching himself from very far away. Beside him, his chancellor unrolled the final page and smoothed it flat with 2 pale fingers. "It is a small thing, Majesty," Vaskia murmured, "measured against 10,000 lives. A small thing. That was what they were calling her now. Riven's wolf had gone silent 3 days ago. It had happened the moment he understood what Morvain truly wanted. Not gold, not land, not the surrender of a single spear, a bond bride of royal blood. To seal the treaty, blood to blood, so that no future king of Caldray could break the peace without breaking his own house. And of all the blood in Haimeir, Vaskir had found the one drop the court would miss least: Isora, the Omega Queen. The low-born wolf Riven had bonded against every voice at his council table. The girl from the river villages who had come to court as a healer and left it as his mate, to the fury of every high-born family who had wanted the throne beside him. They had never forgiven her for being chosen. And now, at last, they had found a use for her. They led her in without chains, which was somehow worse. She wore the plain grey of a traveller, not the silver of a queen. Riven understood distantly that this too was Vaskir's work. Dress her small and no one in the hall would grieve her going. But Riven grieved. Moon above, he grieved, and could not say one word of it, because 100 hollow-eyed, starving lords were watching their king to see whether he would be strong. Isora crossed the hall slowly. She did not look at the lords. She did not look at the chancellor. She looked only at Riven, and her eyes were dry. That was the thing that undid him. She had already done her weeping, somewhere he had not been allowed to see. "They told me you agreed to this," she said when she reached him. Her voice was very quiet and very steady, and it carried to every corner of that silent hall. "They told me it was your will." "Isora, was it?" Vaskir's hand settled on Riven's sleeve, light as snowfall. "Say yes," that touch said. "Say yes, and 10,000 live. Say no, and the war comes back and they starve, and she starves with them." All his life, Riven had been told that a king's first duty was to the many. No one had ever told him what it would cost to believe it. "Yes," he said. He watched the word go into her like a blade sliding home. He watched something leave her eyes that he would spend the rest of his life trying to remember the color of. "Then, I have nothing left to say to you," Isora whispered. She turned from him, and his wolf, silent for 3 days, silent as a sealed grave, threw back its head inside his chest and howled. It tore at his ribs. It screamed one word over and over, a word Riven ground his teeth against and refused to let reach his mouth. "Mine, mine, mine." He said nothing. He let them take her. At the great doors, Morvain's envoy bowed. A tall, scarred wolf with a cloak the color of storm, and eyes like river ice, and settled a fur around Isora's shoulders with a gentleness that made Riven's hands shake on the table's edge. "My king thanks you for your gift, Alpha," the envoy said. "Isora of Caldray will want for nothing in Morvain." Gift. Riven's claws split the black wood beneath his palms. Then she was gone, out into the falling snow, into a carriage ringed with Morvain spears, and the doors of his own hall swung shut between them like the closing of a throat. He stood alone at the head of the table, long after the lords had bowed and drifted away. Only Vaskir remained. "You did a great thing today, Majesty," the Chancellor said softly. "History will forget her name. It will remember only that you saved us all." Riven did not answer. On the table before him lay the one thing she had left behind. A plaited cord of silver thread, the bonding cord from the night they were bound, slipped from her wrist and set down without a word. He closed his fist around it. It still carried her scent, rain and cedar and cold, clean river water. He would carry that cord, and that scent, for 3 years, and tell no living soul. What Riven did not know, what Vaskir did not know, what not one wolf in either kingdom knew as the black carriage rolled east into the snow, was that the Omega he had just traded away for peace was already carrying the heir to his throne. 3 years is a long time to be haunted by a scent. Caldre healed. That was the cruelest part. The grain came, as promised. The grey wane broke the following spring. The herds thickened, the orchards flowered white, and the pups that were born after the treaty grew up never knowing there had been a famine at all. Riven had traded one life to save 10,000, and the 10,000 flourished, and every day of their flourishing was a stone laid on his chest. He ruled well. Everyone said so. He held his court and settled his disputes, and drilled his warriors, and smiled when smiling was required of a king. And every night he took a plaited silver cord from a locked drawer and held it until dawn, and his wolf, which had not spoken a full word to him in 3 years, would lift its head just enough to whimper once, low in the dark. Vaskir had opinions about the king's long solitude. "A kingdom needs a Luna, Majesty," the Chancellor said, for perhaps the 100th time on the morning the Eastern riders were sighted. "The people grow uneasy with an empty throne beside you. The Lady Ondine is of the oldest blood in Caldre, patient, devoted. She has waited 3 years for you to look up." Ondine stood at the Chancellor's shoulder as she always did now, tall, silver-eyed, beautiful in the cold way of a blade laid out on velvet. She had been waiting far longer than 3 years, and everyone in Haimeir knew it. "The Queen's chambers have stood dark long enough," she said, and smiled, and her smile did not reach her eyes. Riven was spared answering. A horn sounded from the eastern wall. The Morvain delegation had come. It was expected. The treaty had held 3 years now, and Morvain had sent word that its royal house would come in person to renew the bond and reopen the mountain roads to trade. Riven had spent a week dreading it, though he could not have said why. He would find out why within the hour. He stood on the steps of the great courtyard in his black and silver, his lords arrayed behind him, and watched the Morvan column ride in through the gate, warriors first, then the banners, the grey wolf of Morvan on a field of deep cold blue. Then a carriage, black and lacquered, ringed with spears, exactly as he remembered. Riven's wolf came awake all at once, not slowly, not gently. It surged up through him like floodwater breaking a dam, so hard and so sudden that he swayed on his feet and had to lock his knees to keep his footing on the stone. She is here. 3 years of silence, and now his wolf was screaming. The carriage stopped. A footman lowered the step, and the Queen of Morvain stepped down into the courtyard of the man who had sold her. For a moment, Riven did not know her. The grey traveller's cloak was gone. She wore Morvain's blue and silver, a crown of pale iron set in her dark hair, a fur of snow fox at her throat. She stood the way queens are taught to stand, straight, still, utterly unhurried, as though the courtyard and the fortress and every wolf in it existed only because she permitted them to. Then she turned her head and looked at him, and Riven's heart stopped in his chest. Isora. Her eyes found his, and there was nothing in them. No hatred, no grief. No flicker of the girl who had wept somewhere he was not allowed to see. Just a cool, level, sovereign nothing, as if she were looking at a stranger's portrait hung in a hall she happened to be passing through. "King Riven," she said. Her voice had changed too, lower, smoother, worn to an edge. "Caldre honors us with such a welcome." The words were courtesy, the tone was winter. Riven opened his mouth, nothing came out. The king who commanded armies, who had faced a starving kingdom and a foreign war, stood on his own steps and could not find a single word. Behind him he heard Vaskir's breath catch. He heard Ondine go very still. They had not expected this. None of them had. Morvain was to send its king, old Vorian, the scarred wolf of the eastern mountains, not the low-born Omega Caldre had thrown away, dressed now in iron and blue and impossible to look away from. Isora let the silence stretch until it was almost cruel. Then she stepped aside, and from the shadow of the carriage, a small hand reached up to hold hers. A child stepped down into the light, a boy, no more than 2 winters old, dark-haired, unsteady on the cobbles, blinking up at the great grey fortress with enormous, solemn eyes. The courtyard went silent, because the whole of Haimeir was staring at the child, and every wolf who had ever served the house of Ashkarn was seeing the same impossible thing. The boy had the king of Caldre's eyes. The child had eyes the exact deep gold of the Ashkarn line. Every alpha in that courtyard could see it. Gold was the rarest color a wolf's eyes could carry, passed down the royal bloodline of Caldre and no other pack in the known world. And it was staring up out of the face of a Morven prince, held by the hand of a woman Caldre had traded away 3 winters gone. Nobody spoke. Nobody dared. Riven felt the courtyard tilt beneath him. 2 winters old. And Izora had been gone 3 years. Which meant the child had not been got in Morvain at all. He had been made here in Caldre before ever she was traded away, and carried east in her body like a secret she herself might not yet have known she kept. The arithmetic did itself, brutal and immediate, in the mind of every wolf present. His wolf slammed against the inside of his ribs so hard he tasted blood. Hours. Majesty. Vaskir was suddenly at his elbow, his voice a thread of silk pulled tight. Perhaps we should receive the queen inside. Away from the eyes of the yard. Away from the eyes of the yard. Away from 100 witnesses doing that same terrible arithmetic. Riven understood the Chancellor's meaning perfectly, and for the first time in 3 years, he wanted to close his hand around the man's throat. Isora had watched the entire silent reckoning play out. She had counted every wolf who counted the winters, and when she spoke, her voice was as smooth and cold as lake water under ice. "My son is tired from the road," she said. "He will rest. And then, King Riven, you and I will speak of trade, and roads, and the renewal of our 2 houses' bond." A pause, precise as a scalpel. "That is what I was sent to renew, the bond between our houses." The word bond landed in the courtyard, and everyone flinched but her. She swept the boy up onto her hip, murmured something against his dark hair, and let a Morvain nurse lift him gently from her arms and carry him within. The child watched Riven the whole way across the yard, grave, unblinking, gold-eyed, until the doors swallowed him. Riven did not remember giving the order to move the court indoors. He must have. Somehow they were in the great hall, and the fires were lit, and the Queen of Morvain was seated across the long table from him, as if she had every right in the world to be there. She did. That was the thing he could not make his mind hold. 3 years ago, she had stood in this room in traveller's grey and been given away like a sack of the grain they were begging for. Now she sat in iron and blue with a foreign crown in her hair and a foreign army at her back, and Caldre needed the Morvain roads, and the Morvain grain, and the Morvain peace, far more than Morvain needed anything from Caldre at all. She had come back holding every card he had thrown away. "You are wondering about the boy," Isora said. The hall stilled. Vaskir's quill stopped moving. Ondine, seated stiffly among the Caldre lords, had gone the color of old bone. Riven made himself meet her eyes. "Isora. Queen Isora." She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. "Or your majesty, as your own lords would say to any crowned head not of Caldre. Let us begin as we mean to continue, King Riven. You gave up the right to my name in this hall 3 winters ago." The rebuke was so quiet and so complete that not one wolf in the room breathed. Riven bowed his head. "Your Majesty," he said, and the words tasted of ash. "The child is the heir of Morvain," she said. "That is all that need concern the throne of Caldre. Is the heir of Morvain, not as King Vorian's son, not as not yours." Riven's whole body registered the difference like a struck bell, and he saw, at the very edge of his sight, Vaskir register it too. The Chancellor and Ondine exchanged a single glance across the hall. It lasted less than a heartbeat. Most would have missed it entirely. Riven did not miss it. And neither, he realized, did the Queen of Morvain, because her cool gaze flicked to the pair of them, held for one deliberate moment, and something moved behind her eyes that was gone before he could name it. She knew them. She knew exactly what they were. And she had come back anyway, walking straight into the house that had betrayed her, with a gold-eyed child on her hip and an empire at her heel, which meant she had not come only for roads and grain. "King Vorian sends his regrets that he could not come himself," Isora went on, folding her hands. "His health is not what it was. He trusts these matters entirely to me now. A faint, cold smile. He has found me capable. You were always capable, Riven said, before he could stop himself. That was never the thing anyone doubted about you. Something cracked, only slightly, only for an instant. A flicker at the corner of her mouth, a tightening around those level eyes. Then it was gone, sealed over, queenly. We will speak tomorrow, she said, rising. Every lord in the hall scrambled to his feet. I have ridden a long road to stand in this room again, King Riven. Give me the night to remember why I ever agreed to. She was at the door before he found his voice. Isora. She stopped. She did not turn. The boy, Riven said, very low, so that only the length of the table between them would carry it. What is his name? A long silence. The fire snapped in the grate. Outside, the eastern wind rose against the walls of Haimeir, and somewhere above, in a guest chamber not yet cold, a child who should never have been born in Morvain was being sung to sleep. The Queen of Morvain turned her head, just enough that he caught the edge of her profile, the pale iron of her crown, the ghost of the girl he had sold. His name, she said, is the one thing in this world your chancellor could not arrange, your lords could not vote on, and you did not get to choose. And then she was gone, and the doors closed behind her like the closing of a throat. The very same sound in the very same hall, 3 years to the season since he had listened to it swallow her the first time. Riven stood alone at the head of his table, and for the first time since the snow fell on the morning he signed her away, his wolf spoke to him, one word, clear and cold and certain, rising out of 3 years of silence. Liar. He did not know, yet, whether it meant her, or whether it meant him. Riven did not sleep. He spent the whole of that long night rehearsing a reckoning. He built her 100 faces in the dark. The girl who had wept where he was not allowed to see. The wife who had asked, "Was it your will?" and heard him say yes. He braced for her fury. He braced for her tears. He braced, most of all, for the accusation he had earned and could not answer. He prepared apologies. He discarded them. He prepared explanations. I was lied to. They told me you agreed. They told me refusing meant your death. And discarded those too, because from where she stood, they would sound like exactly what a coward says. He walked into the council chamber the next morning, ready to face a wounded woman. He was not ready for a queen. Isora was already seated when he entered. She had taken the chair at the head of the long table, his chair, the black seat of the Ashkarn kings, and she sat in it as though it had been carved for her, one hand resting on a sheaf of Morvan papers, the pale iron crown cold in her dark hair. His lords hesitated in the doorway. No one dared ask the Queen of Morvan to move. Riven took the lesser seat at her right hand and understood that this, too, had been arranged before he ever walked in. She had chosen the ground. She had chosen the shape of the day. She had been choosing things he was beginning to see for 3 years in a court far from here, until choosing had become as natural to her as breathing. "Shall we begin?" she said. It was not a question. What followed was the most thorough dismantling Riven had ever watched. She knew the terms of the old treaty better than Vaskir did. She knew the tonnage of grain that crossed the Iron Road each season, the tariffs, the toll houses, the exact weight of Caldre's dependents, down to the sack. And she knew, without once saying it aloud, that Morvain could close the mountain passes tomorrow and watch Caldre starve a second time. "The roads will reopen," she said. "The grain will flow. Morvain keeps its word. That is the difference between our houses. But the terms will be Morvain's now, King Riven, not the terms a starving man signed with a blade at his throat." "Those terms," Vaskir said carefully, "were generous, your majesty." Isora turned her head and looked at the chancellor for the first time. The room went cold. "They were," she agreed. "I remember precisely how generous they were. I remember the price." She let that sit. Vaskir's quill did not move. Ondine, at the far end of the table, had gone the color of ash and was staring very hard at her own folded hands. Riven watched his wife dismantle his kingdom's advantage clause by clause, and felt something he had no right to feel. Pride. She was magnificent. She had walked out of this hole 3 years ago with nothing but a borrowed fur and a bonding cord left behind, and she had walked back into it holding the throat of an empire in her hand, and she had done it without raising her voice once. He had done that. Not the good of it, the making of it. He had taken a river village healer and thrown her into the cold, and the cold had forged this. The thought sickened him. When the session broke, he found her at the tall eastern window while the lords filed out. The winter light was hard and white on her face. For a moment, one moment, with no one watching, he let himself say her name the old way. Izora. Don't. She did not turn from the window. I need you to know that I know what you need. Now she turned and her eyes were not cold at all. They were burning, and that was so much worse. You need me to forgive you. You need to hand me your apology so you can feel lighter carrying it. That is what men like you do. You break a thing, and then you come to the thing you broke, and you ask it to make you feel better about the breaking. That is not. You said yes. Her voice dropped, low and shaking and absolutely controlled. In that hall, in front of your lords, I asked you if it was your will, and I gave you every chance in the world to say no, and you looked at me and you said yes. Do you know what I built my whole new life on, King Riven? That one word. I laid it in the foundation like a stone. I raised a son on it. They told me. I don't care what they told you. The words cracked out of her, and for one instant the queen was gone and the girl was there, raw and bleeding, 3 years unhealed. I heard what you said. The girl vanished as fast as she'd come. The ice sealed over. We are finished here, Isora said. Ora, I will send my terms by morning. She swept past him toward the door, close enough that he caught it. Rain and cedar, and cold, clean river water, 3 years and an empire later, unchanged. His wolf lunged so hard against his ribs he had to grip the windowsill. At the door she paused, without looking back. You asked me the boy's name, she said. You will not get it from me, and you will not get it from him. He has been taught since he could speak that his name is not for Caldre. A beat. It is the only inheritance I could give him that you could never take away, sell away, or trade for grain. And she was gone. Riven began finding reasons to be where the child was. He told himself it was strategy. The Queen of Morvan held Caldre's survival in her hand, and a wise king studies what his adversary loves. That was the reason he gave his counsel. That was the reason he gave himself. It was a lie, and his wolf, newly awake and merciless, would not let him keep it. The boy was kept in the East Wing with his Morvan nurse, but a child of 2 winters is a difficult thing to keep anywhere, and the little prince had inherited someone's habit of wandering off toward things he was not supposed to touch. Riven found him the first time in the old orchard, crouched over a frozen puddle, poking the ice with intense concentration. That won't break, Riven said. Too thick. The boy looked up. Those gold eyes, his gold, the impossible Ashkarn gold, went wide. Then, gravely, the child picked up a stone and dropped it, and the ice held, and the boy looked back at Riven with an expression of such profound betrayal that Riven laughed out loud for the first time in longer than he could remember. After that, the boy was not afraid of him. His mother's ice the child had not inherited. He was sunlight, quick to laugh, quicker to trust, forever holding up some small found treasure for inspection. A curl of bark, a red leaf, a beetle carried with terrible tenderness in 2 cupped hands. Riven learned him in pieces greedily, the way a starving man eats. The boy was afraid of the dark, and of the tall grey statues in the North Hall, and of nothing else in the world. He called every large dog Wolf, and every small one Wolf, and the actual wolves of Riven's guard Big Wolf, with delight. He hummed. That was the piece that stopped Riven's heart. Late one afternoon, the boy sat in a pool of window light stacking wooden blocks, and under his breath, without knowing he did it, he hummed a low, rolling 3-note tune, over and over, the way children do. Riven knew that song. It was the river song, the old melody of the Shallows villages, the one Isora had hummed the night they were bound, her hands plaited into his, silver cord binding wrist to wrist, moonlight on the water. He had not heard it in 3 years. He had thought he had lost even the memory of the tune. The child carried it now, note for note, and did not know it was a wound. Where did you learn that? Riven asked very softly. The boy shrugged, still stacking. Mama sings it, when she thinks I'm sleeping. He knocked the tower down and laughed. She sings it at the window, the one that looks at the far away. The window that looks at the far away. The east window, toward Caldre. Riven had to look at the floor for a moment. Does your mama sing it sad? He managed. The boy considered this with a toddler's total seriousness. Sometimes she cries, he said, but quiet, so I won't hear. A pause. I always hear. Something twisted in Riven's chest, hard enough to steal his breath. The queen who felt nothing sang the river song at the eastern window and wept where her son was not allowed to see, where her son was not allowed to see, the exact shape of her own oldest wound, handed down. What is your name? Riven asked. He asked it gently. He asked it the way you ask a secret of someone who might, just might, forget he is keeping it. The boy opened his mouth. Then he clapped both small hands over it, eyes huge with the delicious horror of a child who has nearly broken a rule. I'm not allowed, he whispered through his fingers. Not to Cauldre. Mama says my name is a secret from the whole of Cauldre until... He stopped. Until? Riven said, and hated himself for the hunger in it. But the boy only shook his head, hands still clamped tight, and would say no more. That night, Riven did not sleep either. He sat with the silver cord in his fist and thought about a woman singing a river song to a gold-eyed child at a window that faced the country that had thrown her away, and a cold and terrible question began, at last, to take shape. Why send her here at all? Morvain could have renewed the treaty by letter. Vorian could have sent any envoy, any lord. Instead, the ailing king had sent his queen, the one wolf in the world Caldre had wronged, across 100 cold miles with the child, into the very hall that had betrayed her. No one walked back into a house that had hurt them. Not without a reason. Isora had a reason. Riven did not yet know what it was, but 2 floors below him, in the dark, his chancellor was awake too, and Vaskir was writing a letter he would let no servant carry. The seam showed itself 3 nights later, and it showed itself by accident. There was a feast. There had to be, protocol demanded it. 2 crowns under 1 roof. Haimeir put on the best face a healed kingdom could. Fires roared, the long tables groaned. Morvain and Caldre sat down together and pretended, for the length of a meal, that the thing between them was old and settled and cold. Isora sat at Riven's right in Morvain blue, gracious and untouchable, and said precisely as much as courtesy required, and not one word more. Then the boy got loose from his nurse. He came weaving down the length of the great hall in his nightclothes, having escaped his bed for the noise and the light, and before anyone could catch him, he had reached the high table and was tugging at his mother's sleeve, and, because he was too, and tired, and the hall was warm, he began, absently, to hum the river song. 3 notes, low and rolling, up into the sudden silence of the feast. Riven watched Isora's whole body go still, and without thinking, without deciding to, worn down by 3 years and the wine and the sound of that tune in that hall, Riven answered it. Under his breath, the next 3 notes, the way he had hummed them back to her once, by the water, wrist bound to wrist. The child stopped and stared at him, delighted. You know it too. The whole hall was looking now. Isora had turned to face him fully, and every scrap of the queen had fallen off her, and what was underneath was so raw that Riven felt it like a hand around his heart. Where? She said, barely a breath. Did you learn that song? You know where I learned it, Riven said. Say it. From you. By the shallows. The night we bound our wrists. His voice was not steady. You sang it into my hands, Isora. I have not been able to stop hearing it for 3 years. For one endless moment she simply looked at him. Then the strangest thing happened. It was not fury that crossed her face. It was confusion, deep, disoriented, like a woman who has walked a familiar stair in the dark and found 1 step missing. They told me you hated that song, she said slowly. They told me you called it a peasant's noise, a shallows girl's whining, that you were ashamed of it. Her voice began very slightly to shake. Ondine told me, to my face, in Morvain. She came as an envoy in the first year, and she sat across from me and told me you laughed about it at your councils. The name landed in the hall like a dropped blade. Down the table, Ondine had gone rigid, her wine cup halfway to her mouth. I never said that, Riven breathed. I have never in my life said that. I would sooner cut out my own tongue. He leaned toward her, and the whole ruined truth of it was rising in him now, cold and fast, the missing step under his foot. Isora. What else did they tell you? In Morvain. 3 years. What did they say I said? Don't. She stood so fast her chair scraped. Don't you dare rewrite it now. You said yes, I was there. And I was there when they told me you had asked to go. The words came out of him in a rush, and the moment they were free, he saw them hit her, saw them land in exactly the same place his had once landed in her. They told me you begged for it, Isora, that you were weary of a low match and a hard court, that Morvain offered you a crown and you reached for it. That refusing the trade would only shame you and start the war again, and get you killed for nothing. That is the yes I said. I said yes to save your life, because the ones I trusted swore to me that your life was the thing at stake. Silence. Absolute, total silence, the length of the great hall. Isora had gone white to the lips. Her hand found the edge of the table and gripped it until her knuckles stood out like stones. 2 stories, 2 lies, laid side by side at last, and the seam between them screaming. She had been told he discarded her. He had been told she chose to go. And somewhere in the space between those 2 lies stood the people who had told them. No, Isora whispered. But it was not a no to him anymore. It was a no to the thing rising up underneath them both, the trapdoor swinging open over 3 years of grief. No, that's... You're lying now. You're only saying this because the boy... Look at me and tell me you believe I'm lying, Raven said. She looked at him. She could not say it. And Raven watched the first fracture run through 3 years of her armor. Not breaking it, not yet, but cracking it, one clean line straight down the middle, and watched her be terrified of it, because if he was telling the truth, then the story she had raised her son on was a lie, and the grief she had built her whole new life around had been planted in her by the very hand that stole her. I have to go, she said. She did not sweep from the hole this time. She fled, fast, ungraceful, human, the queen of Morvain, gone from the feast between one breath and the next, leaving her son bewildered at the high table and 2 kingdoms staring. Raven rose to follow. A hand caught his sleeve. Vaskir, smooth, steady, smiling for the benefit of the watching hall. Let her go, Majesty, the Chancellor murmured. She is overwrought. Grief makes women say wild things, and hear wilder ones. You would not want to build a doubt on the ravings of a bitter woman. A pause, gentle as snowfall. It would break the peace. It would break everything. Raven looked down at the hand on his sleeve. Then he looked up, slowly, into the face of the man who had stood at his shoulder the day he signed his wife away and called her a small thing. And for the first time in 3 years, Raven Ashkarn smiled at his chancellor. It was not a kind smile. Ondine came to Morvain in the first year, Raven said quietly. As an envoy. Who sent her, Vaskir? The Chancellor's smile did not move, but his hand, on Raven's sleeve, had begun very slightly to tremble. He found her where the child had said she always went, the eastern window, the one that looked at the far away. It was long past midnight. The feast was dead behind them, the fires banked, the hall emptied of every eye. Isora stood alone in a spill of cold moonlight, still in her Morvain blue, her crown set aside on the sill, and she did not turn when Raven's steps sounded on the stone. Leave me, she said. I can't. You are very good at leaving me. You should be. You've had the practice. The words were meant to cut, and they did, and he let them. I'm not here to argue, Raven said. I'm not here to ask you to forgive me. You were right. That's what I came to say. 3 years ago, I let you go, and no lie anyone told me changes that I did it. I want you to have that from my own mouth without a but after it. I said yes. I let them take you. That is mine to carry for the rest of my life, and I will. She said nothing, but her shoulders had gone very still. I came to give you something, he said. That's all. Then I'll go, if you want me gone. He crossed the room, and he opened his hand. The silver bonding cord lay across his palm, plaited fine, worn soft at the edges from 3 years of being held in the dark. Isora looked at it. For a moment, nothing moved in her at all. Then her breath caught, a small, terrible sound, and she reached out, not quite touching it, her fingers hovering over the thread as though it might be a trick of the moonlight. You kept it, she whispered. I have held it every night since the doors closed behind you, Raven said. I could not sleep without it. My wolf would not let me. It still... His voice cracked, and he let it. It still carries your scent. Rain and cedar and cold clean water. I did not have you. So I had this. It is the only thing that kept me from going mad. She took the cord. She lifted it to her face, and she breathed it in, and the Queen of Morvain, sovereign, untouchable, 3 years armored in ice, made a sound like something breaking that had been holding a great weight far too long. They told me you burned it, she said into the thread. Ondine told me. She said you cut it from your wrist in front of your whole court and threw it in the fire and laughed. She said you told them a king does not wear a peasant's string. The tears came now, silent, streaming, and unstoppable. I believed her, Raven. For 3 years I believed you burned us. I would have sooner burned my own hand. And then it all came out. The whole rotted architecture of it. The two of them standing in the moonlight, comparing wounds at last. The letters she had written him in the first year, begging for an answer that he had never received. Intercepted, they both understood now. Burned by other hands. The letters he had sent chasing her in that first mad month that had come back unopened with the Morvain seal, forged, returned by someone who had never let them reach her at all. Ondine, riding east as an envoy of peace, sitting across from a grieving pregnant girl in a foreign court and pouring poison into the one wound that could never defend itself. Vaskir at home doing the same to a king, dressing a healer as a schemer, a wife as a woman who longed to leave. Two people, 100 cold miles apart, each grieving a betrayal that had never happened, each of them mourning a love that had, in truth, never once stopped. I named him at the eastern window, Isora said at last, very quietly. In Morvain. I would stand at the glass and look toward Caldre and I would sing him the river song. And I hated myself for it, because I thought I was singing him toward a man who threw us in the fire. She wiped her face, fierce and clumsy. I let you break my heart every single night for 3 years, Riven, and you weren't even there to do it. They did it for you. They used your face to do it. Riven reached for her. She let him, for one breath, one heartbeat, his hand against her wet cheek, her eyes closing, 3 years collapsing into a single point of contact, and his wolf sang, and her scent was in his throat, and for one moment, the world was whole. Then she stepped back. No, she said, and the iron came back into her spine, deliberate, hard one. No, I understand now that you were lied to. I believe you, but hear me, Riven Ashkarn, because this is the truth underneath the truth. Her voice was steady again. You were lied to. I was thrown to wolves you called your family, and when the thing that mattered most was standing in your hall asking you to fight for her, you believed them over me. That is the wound. Not that you were deceived. That when it came to it, it was so easy for you to believe I would leave you. That you never once thought she would never. Riven had no answer. Because she was right, and no cord in the world could mend that. I did not come back for you, Isora said. She lifted her chin. I want you to understand that. I did not cross 100 miles for your face or your grief or your pretty apologies. Then why? Riven breathed. Why come back at all into the house that hurt you? She looked at him for a long, cold moment. Because a better man than you, she said, on his deathbed, gave me the truth you were too weak to find, and he sent me here to finish it. Riven did not go to bed that night. He went to war. Not with spears, with parchment, the oldest weapon a king has, and the one Vaskir had used to gut him. By the grey hour before dawn, he had them all spread across the black treaty table. The toll house records, the envoy rolls, the sealed correspondence chest from the first year of the treaty that no one had opened since, and the letter, the one his chancellor had written by his own hand 3 nights past and let no servant carry, intercepted in the end by a stable boy who owed his king more loyalty than his king had earned. Riven read it 4 times. Then he sent for Vaskir. The chancellor came smiling, as he always came, robes immaculate, hands folded, the very portrait of the loyal servant roused early to his king's need. The smile lasted exactly as long as it took him to see what was on the table. Sit, Riven said. Majesty, sit. The Alpha command rolled through the room, and Vaskir sat. Riven did not shout. He had learned in one night that the quiet voice was the one that frightened. He slid the first page across the table. Your letter, he said. To the Lady Ondine, written 3 nights ago. In it you instruct her, I'm quoting you, Chancellor, so do correct me, to ensure the Omega and her whelp do not survive to see the treaty renewed, whatever the cost, before the king's sentiment hardens into a claim. He looked up. Did I read your hand correctly? Vaskir said nothing. His face had gone the grey of old ash. Riven slid the second page. The returned letters. Mine. Sent to Morvain in the first month she was gone. Everyone came back with the Morvain seal, unopened. Except the seal is wrong, Vaskir. It's a forgery. A good one. The kind a chancellor's private forger might make. She never refused my letters. She never received them. Third page, fourth, fifth, the interception orders. The forger's payments hidden in the household accounts under a false name. The envoy roll showing Undine riding east, not once, as an envoy of peace, but 4 times over 3 years, each visit landing in the very weeks Izora had later wept hardest. Piece by piece, Riven laid his own ruin in front of the man who had built it. And at last, because there was nothing left to hide behind, Vaskir stopped pretending. She was never fit, the Chancellor said, quietly, almost gently, as if explaining something obvious to a slow child. A Shallows healer, river mud blood. You bonded her in a fever of youth and called it fate, and I let you have your little happiness, Majesty, I truly did, until the grey wane came, and I saw the gift the moon had handed us. He straightened. There was no fear in him now, only a cold and total conviction. Morven wanted a bond bride. The kingdom needed grain, and Caldra needed to be rid of a mongrel queen before she filled your nursery with mongrel heirs. 3 problems, Majesty. 1, trade. I did not create the war or the famine. I merely made certain they were not wasted. And Undine is of the oldest blood in Caldre and has loved you patiently for a decade and would give you sons no lord could sneer at. Vaskir spread his hands. I only removed the obstacle. She removed your memory of it. Between us, we gave you back the throne your sentiment nearly cost us all. He almost smiled. You are welcome. Riven sat very still. He had expected to feel rage. He had braced for it, the way you brace to lift something heavy. Instead, he felt cold. A vast, clear, killing cold. You called her a small thing, Riven said. The day you handed her to Morvain. Do you remember? I remember being right. You handed away my wife. Riven rose. His aura came with him, and the windows shivered in their frames, and the candles guttered flat. You handed away my son, and you have the gall to stand in my house and tell me I am welcome. Vaskir opened his mouth to answer. He never did, because the doors of the treaty hall burst open, and a Morven warrior stood there, scarred, grey-cloaked, river ice eyes wide with something Riven had never seen on him, fear. Where is the queen? The warrior demanded, and it was not a courtesy. King Riven, where is Isora? The prince is gone from his chamber, the nurse lies senseless, and the Lady Undine's rooms are empty. They found the trail through the north hall, past the tall grey statues the boy was afraid of, toward the old sallyport that led down to the frozen orchard and the eastern road beyond. Undine had waited 3 years for a crown. She was not going to lose it to a 2-year-old with the wrong mother's eyes. Riven ran, and the scarred Morvan warrior ran beside him. Bael, Izora had called him once, her husband's most trusted blade, sent to guard her with his life, and behind them the fortress woke to horns and shouting, but Riven outpaced all of it, because his wolf had the scent now, and his wolf would not be outrun. Cedar, rain, cold clean water, and under it, sharp and new, fear, small fear, his son's fear. He caught them at the sallyport. Undine had the boy by the wrist, dragging him through the snow toward a saddled horse, and little Solan was fighting her, all 2 winters of him, digging his heels into the frost and wailing for his mother. And Izora was already there. She had reached them first. Of course she had. No lie in the world had ever been able to keep her from that child. She stood between Undine and the open gate, with no weapon and no crown and no army, just a mother, her chest heaving, her eyes gone wolf-bright and feral. Let him go. He should never have been born, Undine spat. Do you understand what he is? True-born Ashkarn, Vorian's own named heir. One child with a claim to both thrones. He is the end of every plan I ever made. He is my son, Isora said, and lunged. What followed took the space of 3 heartbeats. A blade flashed into her free hand and swung up, at Isara, never the child. Isora took it across the forearm and did not slow. She had bled before. She had been left for less than dead before. And she was not a river village healer anymore. She was a queen who had learned exactly what the world costs. And she got both hands on the wrist that held her child, and she twisted, and the boy came free, and the knife went into the snow. Then Riven was there. And so was his wolf. He did not shift, he did not need to. He simply closed one hand around Undine's throat and lifted her clear off the frozen ground, and let her feel the full weight of an alpha king who has finally been allowed to stop pretending. You put your hand, he said very softly, on my son. Undine's feet kicked at empty air. Bale reached them, and behind him the guards and the frozen orchard filled with torchlight and drawn steel, and Solan, sobbing, launched himself across the snow into his mother's arms, and Isora folded around him, bleeding, shaking, whole. Riven did not kill Undine. He wanted to. Moon above, his wolf howled for it. But he looked at the boy shaking in Isora's arms, and he understood that his son had already seen enough of what wolves do in the dark, and so he lowered the woman to the ground and gave her to Bale's spears instead, and turned his back on her, which was worse. He knelt in the snow before Isora and the child. Let me see, he said. Your arm, Isora, please, let me see it. And this time, she did not tell him no. She let him take her wounded arm in his hands. She let him press his own torn sleeve to the cut. And over their child's dark head, the child who bore his eyes, who carried her song, who had a claim to 2 crowns and a name still secret from all of Caldre, the king of Caldre and the queen of Morvain looked at each other in the torchlight and the falling snow. They knew, Riven said hoarsely. Vaskir, Undine, when they traded you, they knew you carried him, didn't they? That's why they were so thorough. It was never only about removing you. They knew, Isora whispered. Vorian's people found the proof in the end. She looked down at Solan, and her voice went quiet and steady. You should know what kind of man he was, the enemy you feared. He wed me knowing the child I carried was another man's. He gave us his name and his crown so that no wolf in Morvain could ever call my son baseborn or a spy. And he never once asked for my hearth, or my heart, or anything at all in return. He only sheltered us. Her throat worked. And when his own healers uncovered what your chancellor had done, he spent the last strength of a dying king making certain I could carry the truth home. That is the errand he sent me on, Riven. Not to mend your heart. Her jaw set. To make them answer for it, in front of both kingdoms, where no chancellor can bury it and no forger can unmake it. Riven looked down at his son, then up at the woman he had failed. Then let's give them their reckoning, he said, in front of the world. They had gathered to renew a treaty. Every lord of Caldre. Every envoy of Morvain. The great hall of Haimeir, packed wall to wall beneath the banners of both houses, the Black Wolf and the Grey, come to watch 2 crowns sign the old peace anew. They did not get a signing, they got the truth. Riven stood on the dais in his black and silver, and beside him, not below him, beside, stood Isora in Morvain blue, her wounded arm bound in clean linen, her iron crown returned to her dark hair. Between them, half asleep against his mother's skirts, stood a small gold-eyed boy. There will be no renewal today, Riven said. The hall erupted. He let it. Then he lifted one hand, and his aura rolled out across the room, and 800 wolves fell silent all at once. 3 years ago, he said, I signed away my wife to buy your bread. You called it a hard peace. You called it a king's sacrifice. I have let you call it that for 3 years. His voice did not rise. It did not need to. It was not a sacrifice. It was a theft. And I was not the one who was robbed. She was. He told them everything, the forged seals, the intercepted letters, the 4 secret rides east. The poison poured into a grieving girl's ear in a foreign court, in his name, wearing his face. And at the last, the ledger proof, read aloud in his own voice so that no wolf present could ever claim they had not heard it, that Vaskir and Undine had known, that the Omega they traded away for grain was carrying the true-born heir of Caldre in her body when they sent her into the cold. The hall did not erupt this time. The hall went silent with horror. Undine was dragged forward in chains. Vaskir walked forward without them, unbowed even now. Do you deny it? Riven asked him. I do not, Vaskir said. I served the blood of Caldre. I would do it again. And then he played his last card. The one Riven had known was coming, the shard of grey at the bottom of it all. You may hang me, Majesty, the old chancellor said, loud enough for the hall. But know whose work you hang me for. It was your father who taught me that a mongrel queen was a knife at the throat of the line. It was your father who bade me, on his own deathbed, to keep the blood clean, whatever it cost. I did not invent the doctrine that ruined your wife. His eyes glittered. I inherited it from the man whose crown you wear. The hall held its breath, and Riven understood that this was the wound that would never fully close, that the rot had not begun with Vaskir, that it ran back into his own bloodline, into a dead man he could neither question nor punish nor forgive, that some part of what was done to Izora had been done in the name of the very throne their son would one day inherit. He would carry that too. My father is beyond my justice, Riven said at last quietly. You are not. He passed his sentence. Ondine, for the attempted murder of a child and an heir, treason twice over, stripped of name and blood right and given to the deepest cell Haimeir held, to live, because a quick death was more mercy than she had tried to give a 2-year-old in the snow. Vaskir, architect forger, thief of 3 years and 2 lives, stripped of office and title and cast out beyond the borders of Caldre forever, to wander nameless, which for a man who had lived his whole life for the honor of the blood was a colder grave than any gallows. Then Riven turned to the hall, and he did the thing no king of Caldre had done in living memory. He knelt. He knelt on his own dais before both kingdoms, before the woman he had failed and the son he had never held, and 800 wolves gasped as one. I make no claim here, Riven said, and his voice was not a king's now, it was only a man's. She is a queen in her own right, crowned and sovereign, and she owes Caldre nothing but the contempt we have earned. I will not stand up here and take her back as though she were mine to take. I lost that right in this hall 3 years ago. He looked up at her. I ask only one thing of you, Isora. Not for me, for him. Let this hall hear his name. Let Caldre, on its knees, finally learn the name of the son it threw away, so that it can never, ever unknow it again. Isora looked down at the kneeling king for a long, long moment. Then she lifted the sleepy boy into her arms and turned him to face 2 kingdoms, and spoke the name that had been a secret from the whole of Caldre since the day he drew breath. His name, she said, is Solon. A murmur ran through the hall, the shallows word, the river word, half of them knowing it, half of them turning to ask. In the tongue of the villages your throne forgot, Isora said, her voice ringing now, fierce and clear and unbroken. Solon means the light that comes back after the dark. She held her son higher. I named him at a window that faced this country, every night for 3 years, because even when I believed you had burned us, some traitor part of me could not stop hoping the light would come back. Her eyes blazed, wet and fierce. So here he is, Caldre. Here is your returning light, and you will never be worthy of him. Forgiveness is not a door that opens all at once. Riven learned that in the weeks that followed, and he learned it the only honest way, slowly, and on her terms, and without ever once being allowed to forget what he had cost. Isara did not fall into his arms. She was a queen with a kingdom of her own waiting in the eastern mountains, a dowager crown, a regency to hold for a son who would one day rule 2 thrones or neither, depending on how wisely the adults around him chose. She had 100 reasons to take Solon home and let Caldre become a scar she never touched again. She stayed anyway, for a while. She told herself it was for the boy. That was the door Riven walked through, the only one she left open. He did not court her. He courted Solon. He learned that his son hated turnips and loved thunder, that he named every wooden animal after himself, that he slept with one small fist curled as though holding something no one could see. Riven was there for the missed things now, the crooked drawings, the scraped knees, the endless grave questions a 2-year-old asks about a world he is only beginning to suspect is enormous. One evening, they sat together on the cold steps of the eastern orchard, the boy between them, watching the light go down behind the mountains that led home to Morvain. Solon, half asleep, hummed the river song, and this time, when Riven answered it under his breath, the next 3 notes, low and rolling, Isara did not go still with grief. She joined him. Her voice and his, wound together over their drowsing sun, the old shallows melody rising into the dark exactly as it had risen once over the water, wrist bound to wrist, a lifetime and a betrayal ago. When the song ended, neither of them spoke for a long while. I will never fully trust you, Isora said at last. Not cruelly, just true. Part of me will always be the woman standing in that hall, watching you say yes. I don't think that woman ever entirely dies. I know, Riven said, but... She looked down at the sleeping boy, and something in her face eased, some not 3 years old. But you knelt, In front of both your kingdoms, you got down on your knees and you gave him his name instead of taking mine. And you have not asked me for a single thing since. A pause. That is not nothing, Riven. It took you 3 years too long. But it is not nothing. She reached into the folds of her cloak, and she drew out the silver bonding cord, the one he had carried in the dark for 3 years, the one she had taken back at the eastern window, and she laid it across her own open palm between them. She did not put it on. She did not give it to him. She only let it lie there, in the last of the light, where they both could see it. Not yet, she said, before he could speak. Maybe not for a long time, maybe never, and you will have earned the maybe and nothing more. Her jaw set, queen to the last. But it's on the table, Riven Ashkan. For the first time in 3 years, it is on the table. That is where we begin. Riven looked at the cord. He looked at the woman he had lost, and the son he had found, and the fragile, unbearable, unearned maybe lying between them in the dying light. And for the first time since the snow fell on the morning he signed her away, the king of Cauldre let himself hope. It was not forgiveness. Not yet, but after 3 stolen years, hope was its own kind of homecoming, his returning light. Thank you for staying with Riven, Izora, and little Solon all the way to the end of their story. If your heart cracked even a little when that cord finally touched the table, then you understand exactly why I love telling these tales. And I'd be so grateful if you'd let me know you were here. Tap that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so the next werewolf romance finds its way to you the moment it drops. And before you go, I always love knowing where in the world our little pack is gathering tonight. Leave a comment and tell me your country, your city, or just your corner of the world. I read every single one, and it never stops amazing me how far these stories travel. Until the next tale, keep your loved ones close, keep hoping even in the dark, and may your own returning light always find its way home to you.